Welcome to Mental Healthy, the podcast where we share stories of the professionals and experts worldwide working in the mental health field. Here's your host, Dr. Kenyon Knapp.
Well, welcome everyone to the Mental Healthy Podcast. I'm glad to have you with us here today. I've got a special guest who should look familiar to a number of you, Major General Bob Dees. Welcome to the program today, sir.
Oh, great to be with you, Dr. Knapp. It's wonderful.
Well, I appreciate you being here. And, our podcast has been around for 3 years now, and some people might remember that you were actually our very first guest. I recall that with fond memories, and I appreciated the time you put in that day.
Well, that was a privilege. I've got a big plaque on the wall. It says first guest of the Mental Healthy Podcast.
Oh, that's great. Well, we appreciate it. And, of course, we greatly respect all the work you've done over the years. Some of it, of course, with Liberty University and different programs you created here. But then also the National Center for Healthy Veterans. Some of the listeners know that that's just about 15, 20 minutes south of Lynchburg here. And for those who are not aware, why don't you just give a little introduction about the work you're doing right now?
Of course. Well, it's good to be with you. And yes, we are close to Liberty, and it's a wonderful relationship because we have volunteer Saturdays. Many of our volunteers are Liberty students, either and faculty. We've got a Liberty class coming out this next week. We do a little mentoring. They do a lot of observing, and they help us. We've got a lot of Liberty interns. So it's really a great relationship. I would first say I've got a picture behind me. That's one of the blank walls I could find. But the point is, this is a rendition of a jump we did in Holland, 50th anniversary of Operation Market Garden. Mm-hmm. I won't dive into that, but the point is, at the top it says "Welcome Liberators," and at the National Center for Healthy Veterans, it's not part of our vernacular, but we truly liberate people. They come here, at-risk veterans come, and I'll talk about some of the pains they face, but they come and we get to liberate them. It's a privilege from PTSD, from traumatic brain injury in various ways, from moral injury, and then ultimately from adverse childhood experiences that often shape whatever their military experience and trauma have been. So we, and certainly at Liberty University, the liberty in Jesus Christ is we're a faith-based organization. We don't force people into any faith they don't have to pass an acid test to get here, but we have a wonderful, conducive, Christian, loving, affirming environment that really speaks for itself. It's powerful. People sense it when they get here, even if they're atheist. Or we have a Native American from Alaska that's with us in our program, and so somebody came to me and said, "Sir, we think we've got marijuana up in the village with the veterans." And as it turned out, this was the Native American burning sage as part of his Native American rituals. So we're pretty wide open in terms of who we bring here, and yet we find that the power of God for salvation to everyone who has faith. We frequently do baptisms in the Big Otter River around the thing and so forth. So it's an exciting place to see God work in people's lives in powerful ways. So with that now, so what's the Chamber of Commerce pitch? We say we're the National Center for Healthy Veterans. Healthy comes out of the Great Commandment. Love the Lord your God, heart, soul, mind, strength, neighbor as yourself. Mm-hmm. That equates to a paradigm we call PMSER, physical, mental, spiritual, emotional, relational wellness equal healthy. So that's what we aim. And each of our patriots, I just got a great report yesterday. One of our patriots has been struggling with some injuries and things. He went through his personal development report yesterday with his coach. Mm-hmm. And this patriot was incredibly clear-minded and committed, and set some very realistic and even aggressive goals for himself. And it's been pretty cool to see how that has worked. So they have this personal development plan that helps them develop short-term goals, long-term objectives as they progress, and they're coached through that. And then we also use that PMSER paradigm for looking at people when they come here, and also for doing research about our various protocols and outcomes. I say that we're a holistic integration of proven best practices. And what do I mean? One, the Japanese would call it forest bathing. We're on a beautiful 339-acre platform with 1.5 miles of Big Otter River frontage. We have horses, we have cattle, we have goats, donkeys. We have 300 egg-laying chickens, give us 80 dozen eggs a week. And so all of that is a wonderful healing platform. Now, when you add to that, then our pillars, if you will, of this holistic integration, uh, therapy is incredibly important. I mean, that it does, but we use therapy in maybe a broader sense.
Mm-hmm.
One therapy I would highlight that might be non-traditional is what we call work therapy. Work is critical to the folks we in our demographic, and work provides purpose and self-esteem, and it also promotes teamwork, which they're missing having left the military many times. They're sort of out and who's their team, what's their purpose, what's the higher calling, who do they serve, all that are existential questions for our patriots that are facing the threat of suicide and other things. So that dignified work is truly therapy. And then in addition, we have equine therapy. As you know, and many others probably, that horse is like an MRI machine on four hooves.
Mm-hmm.
And the veteran, the patriot, faces that horse, and it's really a reflection of their own emotions. It's a wonderful vehicle for the patriot to externalize story. They'll tell their own traumatic story in the life of the horse, the actions of the horse they see they're operating with. And with equine therapy, we have a certified equine therapist, but we also have a clinical therapist that work as a team with the veteran in an equine therapy session. So it's really powerful. And when I say holistic integration, under HIPAA, within the HIPAA bubble of all this, what happens in equine therapy extends into the counseling room, extends into dignified work. And so that's when we say, it's mutually reinforcing. And then the third type of therapy clearly is more clinical, traditional therapy. We have licensed professional counseling. We have a number of interns and doctoral practicums and a resident that are all helping us via Liberty University. So we're grateful to Liberty University. Dr. Jeannie Brooks is our director of veteran care here and heads up our overall counseling effort. And that counseling effort also has case management in it that connects with the VA medical system and with civilian medical system, and then just 1,000 other things that the case managers do that are critically important to the success path of these veterans, whether it's a VA claim or medical appointments or we work a lot of family issues related to parental support and things like that. So that whole team, in terms of the therapeutic side of it, of work therapy, equine therapy, and then clinical therapy, is awful powerful, and that helps us. We say our bumper sticker is to return healthy veterans to America.
Mm-hmm.
Let me take a deep breath. If you want to interject a question, that's fine. But I'm getting ready to launch into sort of the presenting need that we address.
Absolutely. I mean, you raised a number of great points there. I mean, we love the therapy that you do and the real holistic approach. And I want to say, certainly from Liberty University's perspective, we're a military-friendly university, and it's been a privilege for everyone here at Liberty to, go down there and serve, whether it's volunteer or whether it's internships. And given our audience here with the School of Behavioral Sciences listening, I certainly want to convey to the listeners that if you have a heart for working with veterans and really helping veterans become all that they can be, to use a military logo, right. We'd love to have our interns at the university go down there and work. If they're not local here, some people have made the effort to come from a distance and come do internship work. We'll certainly support that. Or if they're local, it's great to have them come work with you. And there's so many different therapies that you do that our interns can help with, and that's certainly great dignified work for them as well.
Yeah, amen. Well, thank you. Yeah, that's exactly right. We lean pretty far forward in terms of innovative technologies, technology insertion. and then we've only been in existence for 4 years. So we've got wonderful programs, protocols in place, but the more we turn the crank, the better we get at the execution side of it, which is so very important with our folks. Let me shift gears for a moment.
Please.
I was walking the Vietnam Wall with a Vietnam widow, and well, that's how she referred to herself. When we went along the wall and she sort of had her eyes closed, we got to the T's, and she starts running her hand in a circle, said, "John Thompson, John Thompson," and then she declares, "He's not here." And I looked at her with some curiosity, and she said, "John Thompson didn't die in Vietnam, but he came home with an expiration date." And immediately I got what she was saying, because John Thompson had taken his life. But she was identifying that part of the Vietnam Wall that we observe, over 50,000 deaths compared to the 73,000 veteran suicides in the last decade. That Vietnam Wall is simply the tip of the iceberg. And when there's a water level, and we know what icebergs look like. And so under the water level is all of these ravaged families. There's all these Vietnam veterans that are living with the wounds of war, visible and invisible. And so that part of the iceberg under the water, much larger, much longer, if you will, in terms of duration. And as a result, we as an organization, we recognize the scope of that trauma. And so we dive down into that, if you will, that iceberg, and pull people out as God makes them available to us, and help them get healthy above the waterline, and then help them comfort others with that which they've been comforted, and become part of the solution, not the problem. So that's the graphic way for people, maybe particularly people that aren't familiar with the military, to understand the long-term cost and the deep cost of conflict. And that you have that for the Vietnam War, but also for Afghanistan, Iraq, and it just goes on and on. So that's an important thing to look at. The second thing related to this, that's part of how do we understand the military presenting need and pain, but also part of this is we in our country today have a scarcity of military relevant, culturally expert with respect to the military counselors and coaches. And so that's why we're working so aggressively with Liberty University, because you have a wonderful military DNA as well as Christian DNA, and that's the sweet spot for us. Military relevant Christian coaches. We say biblically founded and therapeutically sound military relevant coaches and counselors. And so the counselors, you grow counselors at Liberty University and other places, and as we can help them understand the military culture, that helps a lot. And then coaches are different. Coaches don't require the same rigor on the academic side, and yet coaches can be very helpful. Coaches are the ones administering our personal development plans. So they're very helpful as well. And we work with various coaching organizations to help, again, develop military relevant coaches that can help as well. So that's all part of understanding the culture. If you were going to minister in Latin America, you would want to understand a bit about the language, a bit about the culture, the norms, and that helps you be in step and sort of earn the right to be heard. With many of our veterans, it's important for people as therapists to earn the right to be heard by taking the time to understand the culture and then sort of tiptoeing in, because our veterans have done incredible things on our behalf. And a lot of the people we have here at National Center for Healthy Veterans, they've suffered as a result of that, as I say, the visible and invisible wounds of war, and we're helping them. But for a therapist to walk into it, you have to have a fair degree of compassion and a fair degree of tactical patience to earn that right to be heard. And then the veteran, it's really meaningful when that veteran trusts, which is the coin of the realm, and then you go from there. So thanks for letting me give that little soapbox pitch on that. Yeah.
No, absolutely. It's really interesting. One of the things I appreciate about your approach too is I know you have all these different creative therapies, like you mentioned, the animal-assisted therapy or the equine-assisted therapy and all the other traditional mental health approaches. But you don't just treat people just in the immediate moment. You try to help them be capable in the long run. And of course, we refer to that as resiliency. And I know you've developed a number of curriculums over the years. Could you speak to the topic of resiliency and how you try to develop that with the Patriots?
Sure, you bet. I'll give you a little more rigor in a second, but I was reading in Psalm 20 the other morning, and I'll just repeat what it says. In Psalm 20, it talks about the things that the Lord does on our behalf. He answers us. He sets us securely up on the high. He sends us help. He remembers us, and so forth. But it gets to the very end of that, and the last verse 8 of Psalm 20 says, they have bowed down and fallen. He's talking about some trust in horses and some trust in chariots and horses, but we will boast in the name of the Lord our God. So he sets up that contrast, those who trust in earthly things, and then those who trust in the Lord their God. And then the next thing he says, they, referring to the people that have their trust in the wrong place, they have bowed down and fallen. It says, but we have risen and stood upright. And so when you really look at that, it's Jesus said, in the world we will have tribulation. It's a reality. So we will all get body slams. We'll all have hurricanes that come into our life of different nature. And so we need to recognize that's a reality. And then the question is, how do we deal with that reality? How do we navigate adversity? How do we experience post-traumatic growth and get better, wiser, stronger as we go through these experiences? And so that's an essence of what we do. Now we have 12-week blocks in our curriculum, our 9-month curriculum. And the first 12 weeks are on resilience. It's not unlike the resilience curriculum we've done at Liberty University and had a lot of people, in your world go through all of that. I think there are over 10,000, in fact, now that have gone through those programs. So we teach that, and it's based on a resilience life cycle. And basically it says, okay, if we knew a hurricane was coming our way, what would we do? How would we prepare? The Airborne Jump Command is get ready. So how do we get ready for these storms of life? And it's all sorts of things about knowing your friends, 911 friends. It's not your Facebook friends. It's a small handful of people that'll be right at your side immediately and helping, and vice versa. Know your enemy. Oftentimes we do have enemies, to include ourselves. Lust of the flesh, lust of the eyes, woeful pride of life. And so you go through these, how do you set the conditions ahead of time to have the best possible response to trauma? You're probably familiar with Tedeschi and Calhoun, University of North Carolina.
Yes,
they
sir.
did a seminal study. After Vietnam, they reverse engineered how people responded after Vietnam. And they found some had engaged in resilience building practices, others had not. And then the results, the outcome, was a bipolar response, that either they would grow. That's what they called in that study post-traumatic growth. That's where I think the term originated. Or they would spiral downward, depression, despair, even worse. And so it's this fork in the road. That told me, as I work with veterans, that you can do things ahead of time so that there's a better outcome in response to trauma. And so we spend a lot of time on this before phase, before the storm hits, and help people develop those life skills. Obviously, one of them is know your equipment. Your equipment includes the armor of God. And so we spend time on that. And then in this resilience life cycle, then there's the storm. And it's like in Psalm 57, it talks about hiding under the shelter of God's wings until the destruction passes by. And so with that suggests that, it's chaotic. Sometimes we can't think straight. It's just crazy. And that's where we're footprints in the sand. And we're hiding under God's wings as this destruction passes by. And then there's a lot in this resilience paradigm we teach. Underneath each one of these phases, we have some subparts. And so there's actions on contact is what we do for when the storm hits. And it's reflexes that we've tried to develop before, so that we have the proper reflexes to trauma. Call your 911 friends. Keep breathing, which means maintain your routines, whether it's food, exercise, etc., as you're going through trauma. Guard your primary relationships, because we tend to attack the ones we love the most. So there's some actions on contact that are very helpful. And then after the fact is, okay, we've gone through this storm, and now we're in the most difficult phase, and that's recovery in one form or another. And so I divide them into two parts, looking through the rearview mirror. And as we look through the rearview mirror, how do we process that trauma we went through, to include grieving well, to include the guarding of the primary relationships, as I said. And then how do we end up moving forward into this next phase, where we look through the windshield. The British lost 100,000 people in the Battle of the Somme, and they were concerned that they would never again be able to regain their vital optimism as a nation. And so I use that sort of as a paradigm, an analogy, because after we go through trauma, we really start to wonder if we can ever bounce back. And so there's a part of that that's called singing a new song. How do we learn to sing a new song? How do we get spring in our step? How to, all of a sudden, we start hearing the birds that are singing and seeing the sun when before. And God does it, each of us differently, but he does it with surety. And then how do we comfort others with that which we've been comforted? And then also, how do we revalidate our calling? Because a lot of time God uses that trauma to help us get better, wiser, stronger, and then direct us a few degrees left, right, or maybe even an about face based on what we've learned. Then it's the resilience life cycle, a feedback loop, because we have to learn and adapt and get ready for the next storm of life, which will come. We don't know what it'll look like. So excuse me for machine gunning that, but that's the essence of what we teach in the first 12 weeks, and is really, really powerful, because the next 12 weeks we get into a trauma recovery course, and they will need some of those tools that we've taught them as they now do a deep, deep dive into their fundamental issues. And we really peel a lot of the layers of the onion. It's a difficult 12 weeks for these guys, and yet it's a very liberating one in many ways.
Yeah.
So that's, and then the last 12 weeks is a Jobs for Life. We get them in an internship so that we get them involved in this transition to their next season of life as best we can. So
that's great. I'm encouraged that I've been able to go down there and visit you a number of times, and I've seen the fruit of your labor, and the way a lot of these gentlemen are just really, well, gentlemen and potentially ladies are,
right.
Certainly encouraged and got back on track again, and find a lot of meaning and purpose in their lives, which is great. And going along with what you just said too, it reminds me. Last week I was in England. And I saw the way that they had recovered, and sort of there's a lot of optimism and things going on in England right now after they went through that hard time in World War II that you were referring to. And as I recall, recently God allowed National Center of Healthy Veterans to go through a little time of challenge as well back near Christmas. Do you want to give the listeners a little summary of what happened?
Oh, sure. Sure. Yeah, some may have heard of this already. On November the 9th, we had 125 volunteers, some of them from Liberty University. We had a prayer circle, and then we spent that day preparing for November 11th, which is Veterans Day. We normally have 500-600 people here, and honor veterans and so forth. And the Lieutenant Governor was coming to be the speaker on that day. So we woke up on the morning of the 10th, the day before Veterans Day, and the entire barn, 22,500 square feet of barn, riding arena, our admin offices, and a maintenance facility were all burned to the ground. Traumatic. You can say that was a true body slam.
Absolutely.
And particularly the young barn manager that showed up, saw the 40-foot flames, saw her home. Gratefully, only 2 animals perished. All the others were out in the field, and that was, we're grateful for that. But it was a real trauma. And we really walked our way through that, we think, best we could in a God-honoring sense. You were out there helping to talk with some of our folks. And as you know, the next day on Veterans Day, as we've been navigating this storm. We had a very powerful memorial service down. The flames are every now and then intermittent, but the smoke was coming out and all that still. It was a very visceral point, but we had a memorial service right there, and we recognized that our worship is our weapon, and we recognized that we really had to lean in to that moment in time, and we did. And God has done some amazing things. And in particular, that young barn manager, Caitlin, she's a Liberty University graduate. She very soon then gave a message to all of us on hope. And she also wrote that. And so I've got all of that. That'll be part of the next book of one form or another. And then yesterday, she gave an incredible message on gentleness. And I won't get into that, but God has just galvanized her and the rest of us in various ways so that we're seeing incredible spiritual strength, growth, things that never would have happened that have occurred as a result of this. And we're proceeding forward. Obviously, it was a real sort of kick in the gut. It's about $1 million financial ding that we've got to recoup and so forth. But God has really proven himself. He says he comforts the brokenhearted and the broken in spirit. And so he's doing that in powerful ways. And so we are, I can pretty confidently say, better, wiser, stronger. And we're navigating this, and it's just gonna, and it's part of our journey. And we're grateful, and we're playing the glad game in various ways.
Absolutely. Well, let's pause there for a second. I know, a lot of the listeners are, really supportive of the military and all that. And you guys had this fire hit your facility, your largest building, and burned it to the ground. I'm sure a lot of people listening now are going like, man, I'd love to help out. Is there some place that listeners could maybe donate a little bit to try to help out your organization?
You bet. They can go to healthyveterans.org.
Okay.
Healthyveterans.org. There's a banner across the top that talks about fire relief. There's also a separate button that says donate now. You can use either one of those. We really appreciate any support we can get on rebuilding that new barn. And then secondly, when you go to that website, there's also a button that says refer a veteran. So many of your listeners are around the country, and they're observing perhaps veterans that are at risk, in need. Maybe they're stuck in their parents' basement, video games, as I mentioned before, under bridges, whatever. If you find veterans in need that you think would benefit from this life reset that we offer, 9-month program, with all that I've described, then that button helps you start the process to refer a veteran. A lot of veteran service organizations, criminal justice system, social services, others, and then a whole bunch of parents, brothers, sisters, people that know that Johnny needs help, and maybe that Johnny's family is going down the drain. And when we have a veteran here, usually they're by themselves, but many have families. Most of their families are not intact. For one, they're dysfunctional in one way or another. And so part of our mission is to help counsel the family, counsel the children. If they're local, we give the children equine therapy and all sorts of the same type of therapeutic tools that we use with the veteran. We had one 13-year-old daughter come in. The people coming were very accomplished, and it was a little surprising that they were coming into the program, family, and she said, we just want our daddy back. And so, we get all sorts of presenting needs, and that includes families. And so we help across that board. So yes, please, healthyveterans.org. Love to have your donations. We appreciate it. My grandmother used to say, many hands make light work.
That's right.
So appreciate that. And then secondly, we'd love to have your referrals, because we want to help as many people as we can.
Absolutely. Your grandma has a lot of wise words there. And then Lord willing, we'll try to provide some more workers down there, though we know that you guys carry the load. Let me ask this too. I know that there's all kinds of therapies that we mentioned you've already been using, but I've heard from you that there's some new creative forms of therapy, different forms of therapy that the research is still developing on it, but it's holding great promise. There's certain kind of chambers, I believe, that you're working with now that are helpful.
Yeah.
Could you tell the listeners about that?
Well, some may be familiar with it, but it's hyperbaric oxygen therapy.
Mm-hmm.
And hyperbaric oxygen therapy is putting people under pressure, generally pure or near pure oxygen, about 1.5 atmospheres, and they'll go through the hyperbaric chamber. They'll maybe sit in there for 20 minutes under those conditions, and that brain tends to open up the oxygen tends to open up capillaries in your brain. The pressure helps with that, and so forth. And so that's beneficial. And then after about 20 minutes, they take you off the pure oxygen. Your brain thinks it's getting starved, and it starts generating some stem cell release within your own body. And so the typical protocol for somebody we send through is like 2 sessions a day, about an hour-ish session, twice a day for 30 days.
Mm-hmm.
So it's pretty rigorous. We have sent quite a few people to Charlottesville, which is the closest hyperbaric that helps military people. But the challenge, and they do great work, but the challenge is you send a veteran to Charlottesville, and the result of hyperbaric is good news and bad news.
Okay.
The good news is that they can think more clearly. The bad news is that they can think more clearly about the traumas they faced, the relationships they've burned, the financial status. And so it really helps for a veteran when they're going through hyperbaric to have wraparound services.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why we're bringing a modest hyperbaric facility onto our property as part of our market. We're getting ready to put 2 chambers in, and then so we'll start doing it on site. So when they're going through, they don't go to Burger King across Charlottesville and drive back and all this. They have fellowship with their fellow veterans. They have counseling on site if necessary, and so wraparound services to help them navigate that. So we're very encouraged by the hyperbaric. We've seen it be very effective with traumatic brain injury. Some people that have sort of lost some of their mental acuity, and we see some of that coming back with our folks that we've sent. And then also we've had others with chronic migraine headaches that have existed ever since they were in combat, and it has solved some of that. And then hyperbaric also inherently, because of the stem cell thing I mentioned, fights inflammation.
Mm-hmm.
And so everything we can do to reduce inflammation, whether it's a sugar-free diet
Mm-hmm.
or hyperbaric oxygen therapy, reduces that inflammation and helps with joint pain and chronic things that they have. So yeah, that's pretty exciting. And then there's also to tap into what you're saying about experimenting.
Yeah.
EMDR and other types of therapy. There's fertile research
Mm-hmm.
opportunities there, because some have indicated that combination of hyperbaric with some of the other existing therapies is beneficial. And so we'll be experimenting with some things like that as well.
Oh, that's great. I mean, all of these therapies are showing so much promise in the research, and it may not be firmly and totally established yet, but we got to do whatever we can to help people, and you guys are doing that. So that's so encouraging. And I know too from the years that we've been working together that I remember when you first got the property down in Alta Vista, and now it's growing. Why don't you give the listeners a sense of how big it is now as compared to when we first talked 3 years ago?
Oh, sure. You bet. Well, we have an army of 700 volunteers, and that's the primary reason we've been able to make rapid progress.
Mm-hmm.
We inherited a beautiful piece of property, but it was pretty run down. It hadn't been in real operation for 3 years or so. So we just started from scratch. We started rebuilding fences. We started redoing the barn, which had a bunch of stuff in it. And so now, today, we have First Village, which we built. It's got 19 homes in a beautiful community center.
Mm-hmm.
That's where in the community center, they do life. That's where they have their classes. That's where they eat their meals together to defeat isolation, one of the primary causes of veteran suicide. They live in tiny homes within that village, again, to defeat isolation. And we're starting on the second village. We've got 10 homes of our second village that are under roof right now. We're pouring a total of 26 foundations in that village. All that's happening right now. So when the barn fire occurred, that causes us to do some fancy footwork on the financial side, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
But we didn't slow down our building program because we need to build more capacity to accommodate more veterans in our program. At any time, we have 3 cohorts in cycle. The first trimester, second trimester, third trimester. A cohort usually have 5 or 6 in it. And then every 3 months, a cohort graduates
Mm-hmm.
and bring a new cohort in. And so that's just, on a continuing basis. Obviously, we've got a project now to rebuild the barn and reestablish a headquarters. We've used some of the existing farmhouse and a few other things to build offices in because for the next year or so, our staff won't have any place to hang out other than what we're providing in that regard. With the barn fire, every computer, every this, every that, every pamphlet that advertises what we do went down in that fire. So we're doing a fair amount of fancy footwork to reestablish certain capabilities, and we're grateful for that. The insurance money has helped us a bit, but really about a third to a half of the true cost of the barn. So we're working it, and there is a real growth dynamic. The most important growth is the spiritual growth. Our last baptism was on January 1st in the Big Otter River. That's pretty cold on that day, but it's sort of become a tradition that we do New Year's Day baptisms, and that's pretty meaningful.
Absolutely. I remember seeing that on Facebook. And of course, listeners, you can follow them on Facebook, and I love to follow and see all the pictures and videos that you post, and it's so encouraging. And I tell you about, before we wrap it up and go, I always try to ask the guest if there's anything else, any final thoughts or anything God put on your heart that you might want to share here in a second. But listeners, this is a wonderful organization. I mean, I can say I've seen it again and again, how they help people, how they, give these patriots, these soldiers, these veterans their lives back, so much dignity, so much encouragement. And so I'd encourage you, listeners, please go to their website, please donate. If you're looking for an internship site, please contact our internship staff about that. We'll definitely work it out for you to go down there and help out, and not just help them, but you'll learn a lot as well, because there's so many great therapies, which you've heard about today, that they're doing. So I know that would help you and be a win-win, and that's a great thing. So, Bob, let me just ask you, any final thoughts you want to share with the listeners today? Anything else God put on your heart?
Well, I guess I'm just being prompted to tell a little story. In my mind, it relates. Your listeners can determine if it relates. Abraham Lincoln in 1863 was engaged, obviously, in the Civil War. Gettysburg hadn't happened yet. Very tense time. Incredible pressures on a leader. And so he talks to his young aide and he says, let's take a walk. And they start walking on the streets of Washington, D.C. In those days, it wasn't quite as complicated as it is today.
Yeah.
And they walked over to the National Cathedral. And there was a preacher in the National Cathedral in the main area that was giving a sermon to a small congregation. And so they didn't sit there. They sat in a little vestibule. And Abraham Lincoln was listening. And the young aide, who was anxious that the president would enjoy what he was hearing. He wanted him to have a good time, and so he said, Mr. President, do you like what you're hearing? And no answer. And a few minutes later, Mr. President, no answer. And then finally, Abraham Lincoln, towards the end of the talk, the aide asked the question again, and the president said, yeah, I like what I'm hearing. The pastor was incredible. His content is right on target. He's a good communicator. And so the aide said, so Mr. President, you must like it. And Abraham Lincoln said, well, actually, I think it's a total failure. And what's that about? He said, he failed to ask us to do anything great. And so I don't want to fail on a podcast. I would just talk to all of your listeners. Let's do something great together, because these servants of our nation that have worn the cloth of the nation at home and abroad have suffered on our behalf. And so I would just exhort that all of us do what we can to help them return as healthy veterans and get back out on the street and do good things for America. America needs our veterans now more than ever before, and we can be part of that solution. So I just leave it at that. Thanks to all your folks and all the good work they do around the nation and even the world, I'm sure. And to you, Dr. Knapp, it's always a privilege to engage and serve together.
Absolutely. Well, we support everything you do. We respect you and love you, and we're grateful that you came on the podcast today and shared about all of this.
Thank you.
Absolutely. And so listeners, check them out. Go to their website, the National Center for Healthy Veterans. You can search them on any of the search places online, and I'm sure you'll be encouraged and edified. So God bless you, Major General Dees. We certainly appreciate your time today.
Well, thank you. It's a privilege.
All right. Thank you. And join us next time, everyone, on the Mental Healthy Podcast. We'll look forward to it.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Mental Healthy. If you want to hear more episodes, please hit the subscribe button wherever you get your podcasts, and head to linktree.com/mentalhealthypodcast for all of our social media platforms with the latest mental healthy content. If you have a story to share that relates to what we discussed in this episode or any other episode, please contact us at mentalhealthy2020@gmail.com. That's mentalhealthy2020@gmail.com. Thank you, and God bless.